Case number A002-1. Abducted by the Vetrolment. Normally around 7 p.m. Central Time, I head outside in my backyard to get some fresh air. I stepped outside for around 30 minutes and continued standing in the middle of the yard just looking around in the sky with my binoculars. Around 7:43 p.m. Central Time, something caught my attention. I happened to glance out of the left of me to see something that looked like a huge chunk of metal hovering in the air slowly. I removed the binoculars and stared at the unknown object for around 10 minutes. The object stayed in one single place in the sky and never moved for about an hour. You could easily see this object by the naked eye. This object was completely dull in color, the shape of it was a disc, and it rotated for around an hour. The size of it was my guess, about the size of a football field, and as long as two 18-wheelers. On the bottom of the craft was silver with a few which looked like burnt marks. Either it was burnt marks or rust, I couldn't tell that good. After around 8:01 p.m. Central Time, the object hovered more close to my house and hovered right in the middle of my yard. The shadow of it completely covered the yard. I couldn't see much underneath the craft until it stopped rotating. I could count about 35 windows around it, none of which were lit except for two. Strangely enough, the craft made this loud humming sound which led to make me unconscious. I awoke several minutes later staring up at some kind of blinding ceiling. The room was wide with some controls and tables and some weird-looking tools. Out of the corner of my right eye, I spotted a figure which looked to be about 5 feet tall. Behind it was another figure and another. I counted 3 total while they walked towards me and looked down at me. One of the beings started mumbling something in a language I couldn't explain. The being placed its arm behind me as I stood up on the table while the being gave me this weird-looking book. The book on it didn't have words on the cover, but inside had different pictures of human species, male and female. The male was populated 4 million%, and the female was populated as 5,320,000. I didn't have a clue what this meant, but the being turned the page where it showed a group of researchers looking up at the sky, staring at another disc-shaped craft similar to the one these beings had me on. The being spoke to me through mind, telling me that he was a male and the other two were female. He told me in this correct sentence: "Human and species are overpopulating. We have been given the right to abduct humans by order of the government and your leaders. Such amount can be produced by humans, but our kind is being extinct. Our species, known as the Vetrolment are dying without the help of our second species, known as the Greys." I was confused at the time, but I understood everything. I didn't know what to think of it, but the male alien led me off the table and out the craft. I asked him if they did experiments on myself, but he said no. The male alien told me that when they abducted me, he sent 2 others inside my house to search around for any kind of evidence they needed. The only supposed evidence I had was a few sketchbooks with drawings of aliens and UFOs. Since then, I haven't seen anything interesting, but I do believe they'll come back. And I do believe they are our next human race.
Case number A002-2. My abduction dream. When my daughter was only a few days old, we went outside as she slept in her crib, watching the stars with my husband, wondering about life, having a brand new baby and all. We went to bed about 10:30 p.m, and at midnight I woke up to a blended sounds of wind chime and humming noise, to see my hallway was all lit with a beautiful bluish light with what looked like powder all through the light. I looked at my husband, who was facing the opposite way, that is I laying, and a child facing his direction as well. I looked at the light hallway, when I seen this fat stumpy dog being appear with his hand out. I just stood up, and I was next to the baby crib at this point. I then looked at the clock which showed midnight. Then I looked back at the being, when a small grey about a half-foot taller than the stumpy being came through the wall looking at me with his hand out, as if he was insisting for me to come with it. I took one step looking at them, when a very large being appeared again with its hand extended to me. I for some reason did take its hand, passing the other two looking at me, and we faced the wall. Then all of a sudden, entered a beautiful white all-molded seating spacious craft. In the middle of this craft there was some kind of box with some oval ball hovering above the box, making a vibration feeling and hum sound. I turned to the wall as the 3 watched me standing on the other side of that glowing oval ball. As I was looking at the wall of the craft, when I touched the wall, tiny swirls between my fingers turned iridescent pearl-like. I walked to the glowing ball and reached out for it, when the stumpy being grabbed my wrist. The small grey alien grabbed his hand from my wrist, which felt like sandpaper, and looked at me. Then I just stood there as the inside of the craft became brighter and brighter. Then it stopped briefly, and they were just staring at me, when the small grey being moved its head a bit, and said without moving its mouth, "We do exist where we can't be seen. Then they moved their heads a little, and the fat stumping thing did something to the glowing ball, and we went down into what looked like water. Then you can feel the craft plunge, and you could see bubbles everywhere still going down a bit. The sides of the craft became more transparent, and I was now looking up at a coral reef and fish with the sun's light gleaming through the water. It was very beautiful. Then all of a sudden the craft was going upward, and out of the water traveling back the inside of the craft was getting a little darker. The tall insect being took my hand, and before I knew it, we were back in my hallway. I was looking at my husband and I could see a baby between the crib bars laying the opposite way, and the clock said 12:15 a.m. Still holding its hand, I looked up and seen how the being's eyes were huge wrap-around black eyes about as tall as the ceiling in the hallway, a slit for a mouth, the skinhead dimpling around the eyes, and below the cheeks only, very thick bottom short lashes and very tight bluish-green-grey skin everywhere, black wrap-around eyes, 4 long fingers, thin build large chest, the feet looked like all one, maybe 2 bulges for toes, but were long feet. The short stumpy thing was about 4 feet tall, was brown, no neck, fat stumps for fingers and feet with some, what like a young boy's eyes, lips, and no nose slits and more of a slit mother. The small grey being was the traditional look of a small grey alien, 2 slits for a nose, and mouth slender 4 feet tall. I was not scared, but I would like to have hypnosis on this. Thank you.
Case number A002-3. Possible abduction. Missing 12 hours. At about 6:30 a.m. I wrecked my 2005 F-150 pickup near a friend's house, with whom I had been staying a few days after a surgical procedure. I returned to their house for help. We could not find the truck for some reason. She left and I went to the edge of woods near where I thought the truck was, and continued to look for about 45 minutes. Suddenly, I heard a very loud buzzing humming sound, turned around to be horrified by a large bright light, so bright I couldn't look at it. I observed it floating, pulsating, blinking light. I was terrified, screaming for help, and ran into a bush to hide. After about 5 to 7 minutes I passed out as the light came towards me. I freaked out so much, I guess I passed out. I woke up after daylight. I had no shoes, no shorts, no underwear, and I was out in a terrible storm all night apparently. I only vaguely remember that I was wet and cold and in a totally different place that I did not recognize. I screamed for help, but was apparently very deep in an unknown woods. I walked through the woods looking for a way out. I suffered severe injuries from the briars and stuff. I walked through barefoot. About sundown I found a dirt path and began to follow it. At about midnight I came to a locked iron gate. I went under it since I saw cars driving by, went to one house and no one answered. A lady answered at the second house and called the police, and they gave me a warm bathrobe to wear, since I was very cold and almost naked. The police picked me up, since my parents had filed a missing persons report and they had been searching for me all day. I did not tell them of this experience, except for saying I had no memory of what had happened. They assumed I was on drugs and had done crazy things. I went to the ER and was given fluids for dehydration and antibiotics for severe cuts and abrasions. I tested positive for many hard drugs that I do not remember taking willingly. They think I am surely an addict. I did not tell anyone about this except my mother, who quickly asked me if I saw any bright lights, since I have told her of other strange experiences of missing time and bright lights, which always terrifies me, and I do not watch UFO shows for this reason, nor do I talk about this to anyone but my mother. I am still terrified over what happened to me. I did ask for a kit, and the results were negative. I still do not know what happened to my missing clothes. I can relate events up to the bright lights and after, but have no memory of events in the missing time. All this is documented, since the police have the missing persons report and I went to the ER at Baptist Hospital. The truck belongs to my parents and has been reported as stolen. It has not been found yet.
This is Lon Strickler. If you like this program, it would help us if you would give it a thumbs up. Then subscribe and click the bell icon so you get notification when we upload new first-person encounters. We have many more to come very soon. And by the way, if you have a suggestion or an experience of your own, please leave a comment.